Education Matters, a program designed to bring the education issues that are facing New Jersey board members and administrators and everyone to discuss them. Today we'll be looking at the later start time for schools, particularly the middle and high school. With me is Dr. Burt Mandelbaum. I'll have him introduce himself. He's a pediatrician. He's also a doctor for several districts. So welcome, Bert. Just give us a little brief background.
Thanks, Ray. I appreciate being here and having an opportunity to chat. So yes, I'm a pediatrician. I actually, one of my partners just reminded me that I just hit my 20-year anniversary. The two of us were chief residents and started together. So 20 years in practice. I'm in Central Jersey. We have a practice that's like 30 to 35,000 patients. So we have a lot of patients in this area. I am also chair of the Department of Pediatrics at Penn Medicine Princeton Health, and I've been that for now going on 11 years. And I'm a school physician for a few different townships, Montgomery, Hillsborough. I've been consulting with North Brunswick, and I help with a private school, the Chapin School. So I've had my experiences in the world of pediatrics has kind of brought me to different kind of perspectives on care. One of which, from a school health perspective, was school start times, which we'll talk about today. And that led me probably about 3 or 4 years ago to start championing this concept. And currently, I am the chair of the task force through the New Jersey AAP on school start times and adolescent sleep.
Okay. And I know you're a big proponent. You and I have discussed this numerous times at various meetings. But why is sleep so important? I think that's one of the cruxes of the whole issue.
So this is, I think, a societal issue that we're coming to terms with, is that, like, I remember growing up with this kind of edict of, like, I don't know, you work hard, you sleep when you're dead. Like, this is not, that sleep was not the priority. And we are, the science of sleep over the last 10 years has really blossomed, where we recognize for everyone how important sleep is. And sleep is not just restorative. It's like the brain, which is doing most of our work. This is when the brain is at its most active, where it could process this information. So sleep, adequate sleep, has positive effects on physical health, mental health, on memory, on learning, on athletics and performance. And the opposite, not getting enough sleep, has negative, so detrimental effects on each one of those things. And that's across the board. But in anyone, like in adolescence, we see it exaggerated, and we'll talk about, I'm sure, why that is. But yeah, for kids who are susceptible and growing, like, we know intuitively they need their sleep, and that's why.
Well, we're talking about the sleep. What's different about the sleep cycle of a teenager as opposed to an adult or even a youngster at 4 or 5?
Right.
Is that the crux of the issue here that we have to look at?
Yeah, so I like your questioning, because, like, the first important aspect is sleep. So you just have to accept that sleep is super important, and then so that's important for everyone. And then we say, well, what makes adolescents different? They need sleep just as much, if not more, than anyone. So, like, we talk about, like, the infant phase of this huge kind of developmental brain growth, and then the second most kind of largest brain growth, or rapid a period of rapid expansion, is in adolescence. So we know sleep is super critical to them. So that's one aspect of adolescence. But here's the big thing, is that there is a shift, and it starts in teenagers, and everyone's a little different. So whether it's 12 or 13, and it goes through 20, 22, but during this time of adolescence, their sleep cycles change. So not their sleep needs. They need sleep just as important as ever, but the timing when their body is ready to go to sleep and when their body is ready to wake up shifts. And that is not, smartphones don't help, and our lifestyle don't help things, but that is worldwide, and that has been always the case, that there is this kind of shift, and it's about a 2 to 3 hour shift. So for parents who are used to having kids who were going to sleep 7:30, 8, or then 8:30 as they were grade schoolers, they now have teens who not just want to stay up, they physiologically really can't get to sleep in most cases on a daily basis before 10:30 or 11, and they want to sleep through 7:30, 8. That's what their body is normally shifting, removed from any other outside influences.
Now, you probably have gotten this question before. If we make a later start time for schools, well, the kids are just going to stay up later. They're not going to get their sleep. What is your answer to that? And is there any proof to?
Yeah. So thankfully, like we're at this edge of science where like the proof of concept is done. Like we have evidence to support everything we're talking about now. So this started back in the 90s. So just everything that we'll talk about, schools have done, districts have done successfully and proven that it works. But that is one of the, I think one of the intuitive first steps is like, if you just let them stay up later, they'll sleep later. Or I mean, if you let them sleep in more, they'll just stay up later saying, I don't have to go to bed early. So the data generally shows that that's not the case, that for every minute that you move school to a later start time, the kids actually get somewhere between half a minute to a minute of extra sleep. And I think that there are just some things that go along with this. I have 2 teens now, left to their own devices without any parenting, I'm not so sure when they would go to sleep. Like if I just said like, I'll see you guys, like they might on their own stay up later than they should. So there is an aspect to changing school start times that is an educational aspect where you talk to the community, the parents and the students, and say, we are shifting it because we know you have a hard time waking up early because physiologically you need to stay sleeping, and that you can't go to sleep at 9 or 9:30. But we know you can go to sleep at 10:30 or 11, and you as students or you as parents, it's important to actually capitalize on that and not allow your kids to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning. And this has been done throughout the country, and it's worked. This is not just in theory. Like when you put it in play, the kids actually get more sleep.
Why is this an issue now in the sense, did we always have these early start times for school, or is that something that just kind of developed over time? To be honest with you, I don't even remember what time I went to school when I was in high school.
So it's interesting. So I went to school in the high school in the mid to late 80s, and I was not drinking. I don't think I drank coffee until medical school. Like I didn't know what caffeine was. And we were starting at 7:20 or 7:30. And I just remember saying, why do I feel so sick all the time? Like I just don't feel well. Like I feel tired and not alert. And so that was typical of the 80s. But when you look historically, like in the 40s, 50s, 60s, school start times were 8:30 or 9. Districts were smaller. It was the intuitive time to start. It was only as suburbs got, or even in urban settings, there was more population, there were more kids. They found that you had to run, you can't have all the schools starting at one time. So now you had busing, so you had to run 2 routes, and then some places 3 routes. And we kind of arbitrarily chose the high school kids to start earlier. I don't know, thinking they'd want to get out of school early, sports, work, all the things that we have they do after school. And so in the 70s going into the 80s, it moved so that a lot of these schools were starting in the 7 o'clock range, somewhere between 7 to 8. And that's where it's been. And the adults, we haven't recognized it. It was probably the mid 90s that we started to really recognize the detrimental aspect to this sleep deprivation that we as policymakers are causing to the students. And so then there were studies and people started to unwind it. And, I think we are in 2021, the audience who's listening to this, I suspect the majority of them, it's not the first time they're hearing this. 4 years ago, it might have been the first time they were hearing it. Like, so it really has been, I think it's been catching on. More districts are doing it. More people are talking about it. But it was just an unawareness on our part, which happens often with adults when, the kids feel the brunt of our mistakes and at times.
I want to go back to the beginning, the importance of sleep. What's the detriment of teenagers having a lack of sleep? I mean, does it affect they're starting to drive at that point? with the impact on their athletics, on their academics, just their whole social, emotional well-being.
Pick and choose. So whatever is important to you that you bring as you're listening to this conversation, whomever, whether it's you, Ray, or whomever is listening to this as we're talking, I would throw out that there's not an aspect of life to teenagers that you care about that isn't negatively impacted by lack of sleep. But let me rattle them off, just big topics. So first, let's take education. If that's the main goal of school, I think the school has lots of roles to fill, but we know that learning is negatively impacted by lack of sleep. And so there's tons of studies on retention, long-term retention. And so we can see this in grades. We can see this as we actually test kids, and there's studies 5 hours of sleep versus 9 hours of sleep. We know attendance, so whether it's being late to school or just showing up to school is negatively impacted by this. But then you get into these days, so let's talk safety. So we know that teens are novice drivers, and we know that they have a higher rate of automobile accidents. And there have been some really good studies that teens who are sleep deprived because of school start times have more automobile accidents. And in counties where they've changed the school start times, they've actually seen, within a period of 2 years, a decrease in automobile accidents and mortality. These are lives that we're saving, besides, and all the downstream costs of savings of decreased car accidents and decreased mortality to kids. But then you get into things that are more, I think, commonplace. So take everybody these days cares, it's very buzzworthy to talk about social emotional well-being. There is an abundance of data and kind of no doubt for anyone who thinks about this, that when you are sleep deprived, it is harder to handle your emotions. So these kids who are struggling in school with anxiety and depression, we know almost every mental health feature is worsened by lack of sleep and can be made somewhat better by sleeping more. So not that we could fix all the world's problems by just them sleeping, but it definitely could kind of tweak it and make things a little bit better. And then you get into even things like alcohol. So we know substance use and we know sexual risk taking. There are studies that in sleep deprived adolescents, they're more impulsive, higher substance use, higher sexual risk taking. And when they are less sleep deprived, those numbers drop. So again, and then athletics. My God, how can I forget athletics? So, we want these kids to be active. We love for them to be on teams. We know both at the high school level and at the professional level that if poor sleep leads to worse performance on the field and increased injuries, and better sleep leads to more of that, so that professional teams are hiring sleep physicians to talk to their athletes to say, we need to get you sleep because at your level, it will make a difference. Never mind at the high school level.
Now, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you seem to be thinking your argument is there is no argument to helping increase the sleep for our students, the late start time. There's no scientific reason not to do it.
Yeah. So yeah, there is zero. You will not find a person who will argue that less sleep is better for them. So no one's gonna argue that. And I've been doing this for a while now. It really is hard. Early on, some people tried to make an argument to say, good theory, no data. Now there's an abundance of data to support it. Lots of districts have done it. So the science is sound. This works, and it works. This is like one of these awesome public health measures where what you're not looking at is necessarily on an individual student level. It might make a huge difference, but it's going to make a little difference, somewhere between a little to a large difference to every single student. So when you apply that to a district of 2,000 kids, 3,000 kids, one policy change makes huge strides to a huge population, which is why this is so exciting. So the science is easy. The other questions I'm sure you'll lead me into, maybe not so easy, but the science.
Well, it's probably in a whole other program, and it will be another program on overcoming the obstacles.
Yep.
But what are the main obstacles that you have seen? I think I could rattle them off myself, but I'm going to ask you.
Yeah. So let me put it in this context. They are surmountable obstacles that really the biggest obstacle that I really think are not what I'm going to tell you what the pragmatic ones are, but they are just to make a change like this. It takes smart Board of Ed members with administration and a community to sit down, plan it out, think through, and implement it. And once you do, it's done. But those types of decisions, like they just take some time and effort. And sometimes we're busy and sometimes we don't realize the importance of it. So that's really the obstacle to me, is getting people to the table to say, hey, I'm ready to make a change. Once you're at that table, I think that it is a little easier than people think, but the obstacle is really the biggest one is transportation. And that's because that's where this started. So, if you have 2,000 students in your school and you have so many buses and you need to get them all to school, and you're wherever you are, whether you're at 2 routes or 3 routes, if you're going to decrease the amount, if you want to start school later, then either everything has to shift or you have to flip some start times. And if you don't want to shift or flip times and you then have to combine routes and say, all right, well, everyone's going to start at this time. Well, then you need more buses or bus drivers. So that's a transportation problem. Again, I think diving into it is a longer discussion, but it's solvable. I think that there's quick solutions and then there's ones that cost a little bit more money, but what the transportation people will say is there's always a solution. You just have to decide on which of these solutions you want. So that's one. The other one is then the after school activities. So when schools let out at a certain time, people are prepared if high schools are getting out at 2 or 2:30 and you now want to get them out at 3 or 3:30, nobody cares that you're starting later, but they do care that you're ending a bit later. And you just have to work through those issues. Lots of districts have done this. Sports are, again, sports will be better performance, less injuries, but the administration of playing sports just takes a little bit of time. You have to, and it's hard because this becomes now inter-district, right? So you're playing between 2 districts. So you have to say, hey, can we all get on the same time? So you have to work those things out. But we're talking about 30 minutes, an hour, it's all workable. And keep in mind, it is not automatic. A lot of districts who have delayed their school start time X amount have not delayed the end time the same amount. They've found ways to shorten, to reduce some waste in the school, some time in between classes or, whatever they may be, so that they might move your school start time by 50 minutes, but the end of the day is only 35 minutes later. So there's the after school activities, and whether they're work or community activities or sports, communities just adapt to it. And again, these are not huge major changes. So they seem like they would be, but so that's the second one. And then the third one is just people's reluctance to change. So and whether they're families who have geared around this or teachers or administrators who have geared around their schedule, if you change the schedule, it changes, some aspects of their day. It changes, families worry about, what if my older child would get home earlier to watch my younger child? And in those communities, they found just as much benefit to the older child being able to get the younger child to school in the morning, as opposed. So people adapt, we adapt to everything. And the nicest thing about talking about this post-pandemic is, man, we have realized that districts have the opportunity or the ability to change really, really quickly, really drastically, and everyone adapted. So the potential to adapt and make huge progress quickly is there. We know it. We've seen it. And so that, trying to capitalize on that moment of saying, we're rethinking everything now. Don't worry about the obstacles. Get to the table, work through them. You work through virtual schooling. You could work through this.
I have 2 quick points. One, I just want to reiterate, this is for middle and high school.
Correct.
Our younger students can probably get up pretty early. I mean, my kids, when they were young, They got up pretty early.
Yeah, you're right on the money. So, in the younger kids, and parents feel and know that, like, the younger kids typically go to sleep earlier and wake up earlier. And a lot of districts, and I'm not advocating right now that you automatically district switch, but if you had to run this and you said, just from the pure student's perspective, from their health perspective or education, the younger kids who are often up at 6 or 6:15 in the morning likely would be ready for school by 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. They probably could start at 8 easily and get out earlier. They go to sleep earlier. So as we're in the Northeast and we have daylight savings time, and it gets dark around 4, getting those younger kids home at 2:30, where they could play outside and have some daylight in the winter hours, would be ideal, and letting the older kids go to school later and sleep later. Lots of issues that you have to sift through, but yeah, the younger kids generally are up earlier, go to sleep earlier, and do better. So this is really focused on teenage years, middle school and high school.
All right, from your perspective, I know it's about the students. The adults have to work out the transportation, the athletic issues, and the scheduling issues. But maybe the first step is educating the community, the staff,
Yep.
even the students, and the board and the administration. Where can someone get some information on this? I mean, besides looking at this,
Right.
is there a place that they can go, a website or something, if they want to get more information on this?
Yeah, so I think so the answer is yes. And this is how change happens, right? Like, the first one is you don't take on what seems like big change, even though, again, once you implement it, it's done and everyone loves it. You don't see schools going backwards from this. But you have to understand why it's important to take this on. So outside of places like this, I think the two places I would look to, so if this is mostly for New Jersey members, so we have, through the New Jersey AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, we have a task force on this that has a bunch of resources. And I could, Ray, give you that website. I don't know it offhand, that we could share with your constituents. The other place is there is a national organization, Start School Later, and you can, and they have an abundance of resources on their website as well.
Okay. I'd like to thank Dr. Burt Mandelbaum for joining us about the science behind the later start times for school.